Ever wondered about the struggle of a single father? Well, our protagonist, Inuzuka, lives that life with his little daughter, Tsumugi, who is obsessed with food. A typical day in his life goes with him preparing a pre-cooked meal for his daughter in the morning before school, while she watches her favorite cartoon, Magic Girl. He notices that he had prepared the same meal for her as she had the day before and feels sad about it quite a bit. After preparing her for school, the two of them leave, saying their goodbyes to a picture of his late wife. Inuzuka then drops Tsumugi at her daycare and gets to his place of work, which is the school. It's revealed that Inuzuka is an assistant teacher at a high school, and he has not been the same ever since his wife passed away 6 months ago. This is shown by the fact that he refuses to go to the welcoming party, which is a bit late, as he has to tend to his daughter. Although his colleague tries to convince him to come to the party, he rejects the idea, as he's always thinking about his daughter at the back of his mind. They ask him whether he cooks by himself, and he said only once, and that was the last time, as his daughter had transformed into a goblin after trying the food. Well, not literally, don't worry. After he gets home, he works on a couple more schoolwork, while his daughter watches TV and sees that the cherry blossom season has finally come. The next day, Inuzuka reveals that he's going to take Tsumugi to go see the cherry blossoms, to which she gets really ecstatic about. After cleaning the house with her daughter's help, by help, I mean her just being cute while Inuzuka does all the cleaning, they were finally ready to leave for their outing. As they make it to the park, they notice that there's a lot of people, so Inuzuka, being the responsible father he is, plops Tsumugi on his shoulders as they go on to view the park's beauty. While looking around, Tsumugi notices that there's a lady crying all alone and eating rice cakes under a tree. Tsumugi rushes it over to her as she gets down and goes close to her and asks whether she was alright. She reveals that she wasn't crying because she was alone, but rather because the food she was having was so good. She further explains that she had been waiting for her mother to arrive and that she was a bit mad about her having to cancel. Tsumugi, being the foodie she is, asks her whether it was yummy, and the girl tells her it was super yummy, which makes her want one as well. Sadly though, she had eaten all the rice cakes by the time they had come, so she gets a bit bummed out about that. So the girl looks through her bag and finds a business card of her mother's restaurant and hands it over to Inuzuka. On their way back home, they stop at the warm bento shop, and Tsumugi shows a bit of reluctance as he buys them, so he asks her whether she would like to eat at a restaurant. Regardless, they end up buying the boxed lunches and having them for dinner. Of course, Inuzuka understands that his daughter wasn't really happy about the dinner, but she cheers him up as the two of them play for a bit. The next day, Inuzuka was running a bit late from work and coming home late. He'd come home with the usual boxed bento that he buys for dinner, as it has been hard on him to cook ever since his wife's passing. As he walks into the living room, he finds Tsumugi locked on a cooking program going on the TV. She tells him to write to her mother to make her some meat and wonders whether it would be as good as the ones on the program. This moment broke Inuzuka as he drops the bento he had just brought and rushes outside with Tsumugi on his back. He calls up the number on the business card, and the girl from the other day, whose name is Megumi, answers the phone. He tells her that he was coming over to the restaurant and that it was a hurry as he wanted his daughter to eat good food. Although reluctant for some reason, she agrees and tells him where he can find the restaurant. After going through a couple of shady-looking alleys, singing his daughter's favorite show's theme song, he comes across the restaurant. He peeks in and finds a little restaurant with the girl from the other day. She greets them and hands them the bad news. She explains that her mother isn't there today and therefore the restaurant was closed. This leads to Inuzuka about to leave when Tsumugi asks him whether she won't be having any yummy food. Megumi, who sees this, can't help but do something, so she tells them to stay and that she will prepare some pot rice for her. This excites Tsumugi, who goes over, sits while looking all over the place. Megumi starts preparing the food as she washes the rice grains and suddenly leaves to the back of the restaurant, excusing herself. Around the same time, Inuzuka heads to the washroom, and on his way he overhears Megumi, who sounds panicked. He sneaks a peek from the door leading outside and finds her calling her mother and asking her about how she can make the food, as although she had acted all cool about knowing how to make rice, she had absolutely no idea. I mean, the girl didn't even know how much water she had to put in, which is quite concerning. My mom would whoop me if well, never mind. She heads back inside and somehow manages to carry out the tasks her mom had instructed her on. As they wait for the food to be prepped, Tsumugi, who was drawing, can't help but notice the worried expression on her father's face. Bro was obviously worried about the outcome of the food experiment by Megumi, but he couldn't tell that to her now, could he? After a while, Megumi returns and starts adding some sake into the pot, which worries Inuzuka, but she reassures him that it was only for the taste and that the alcohol will be burned off when it's cooking. It is then that he notices that this girl is from his school and he questions her about it. Apparently, her name isn't Megumi, but rather Kotori Ida, who was from Class 1A. While waiting, Inuzuka remembers his late wife who used to cook them meals every day with her heart and soul. Anyways, after a while of waiting, the rice is finally prepared as they all hear the alarm. Kotori opens up the pot lid and finds that the rice was perfectly cooked as she plates it up for everyone excitedly. Bet this was her biggest accomplishment ever, as everyone seems to love the rice. Inuzuka gets all emotional seeing how happy Tsumugi was and eats the rice as well to find that the hype was, in fact, worth it. He promises her that from now onwards, he will try his best to make good food like this for her every day. Kotori, who sees this, gets shy and asks him a rather unexpected question. She asks whether he would like to make dinner and eat dinner with her. Is she asking him out? I don't know, it's a weird request, and Inuzuka feels so as well. He explains to her that her parents would be weirded out, as well as to why she was cooking for a strange family, to which she fires back saying she can handle all of that. Tsumugi, who understands this, becomes excited as she obviously gets to try the food again. They try to convince him with a cute face, but he kind of refuses, I guess. The next day, as he had promised, Inuzuka starts putting effort into his cooking as he makes an okay-looking breakfast, which Tsumugi enjoys. She literally says she tasted the ingredients, so I guess that's a compliment, eh? He then puts down a couple of packaged food items on the desk and asks her which one she would like to have for lunch, obviously not understanding the difference between fresh food and frozen food. Regardless, the point was he was trying as he even cooks some wieners and even rice. Tsumugi asks whether Kotori had helped, and that's when he remembers what happened. Kotori had explained to him that the restaurant where they had eaten might close up for good anytime soon, as her mother is barely there at the shop. She further tells him that it would be nice if the restaurant's lights turn on every few days in the form of them cooking there and eating dinner with her. Back in the present, Inuzuka is at school teaching when he notices Kotori. He tries to get some background about her and finds out that her parents had divorced when she was in 3rd grade, and that her mother runs a cooking TV show as well as a restaurant, which he already knew as they had been there the day before. He asked the principal whether it would be a good idea visiting her place to talk to her parents about the proposition she had brought up, and he explains that although it was rare for teachers to meet students away from school in the present, back in his days it was quite a common thing. He explains that the teachers used to even have food over at their place back then. When Inuzuka comes home, he finds that his daughter had done a little drawing. In the drawing, he sees 3 people, him, her, and another girl. She tells him that it was Kotori, and that's when he asks her if she would like to go to her place. Tsumugi clearly loves the place as she rants on about it to him, and he realizes he should do something about it. The next day at school, Inuzuka finds Kotori, who had been hiding in a rather sneaky place and enjoying a snack. He tells her that he had considered her proposal to cook together and tells her that he would like to meet with her mother to discuss it. She tells him that her mother will be free that night itself, and that he should bring Tsumugi along as well, so they can eat over at their place. She then asks him about what kind of stuff Tsumugi likes to eat, and they set up the deal to meet later. After school, they head over to the restaurant to find Kotori kneeling down at the doorstep. She explains that something came up and her mother had to leave for it, showing proof of a letter as well. As they are about to leave, she pleads with him to have dinner with her, but he tells her that he shouldn't and is about to leave. Tsumugi, on the other hand, has other ideas as she gets quite excited by the word dinner and even goes to get ready to cook in one of Kotori's old aprons. With this, he has no choice but to stay over and have dinner with Kotori, so he settles with saying that it was only for today. They are about to start cooking when Kotori reveals that her mother had written down a recipe for what was to be prepared. Inuzuka finds the recipe funny as it was like a picture book. She tells him that she had told her mother there was going to be a child, so she had made it interactive in a way so she would like it. He realizes the recipe was for many types of food, so he tells her that they should just stick to making the soup and the hamburg steak. She agrees and they decide to start with the pork soup. Kotori hands him the responsibility of cutting the veggies down while she gets to work on the rice. Inuzuka goes through with his business real slow as he starts cutting up the veggies. He realizes that he wasn't doing very well and was actually pretty slow, so he lets Kotori know that they won't be able to finish up if he was the one who was in charge of the veggies, and that she should help. It is then that it is revealed that Kotori was actually scared of kitchen knives. This was pretty ironic considering her mother is an experienced chef, but when Inuzuka questions her whether she had wanted to cook with them because she needed someone to cut the vegetables for her, she had no choice but to agree. Regardless of this incident, they move on and get back to work on the cooking. Inuzuka tells her that this was good for him, that they had started cooking together, as he was having doubts on whether he could make good food for Tsumugi on his own. He tells her that it was nice that in a way they are helping each other out with the arrangement they had come up with. Anyways, the cooking continues as they cut up the veggies and set up a menu, which was of course done by the little Picasso Tsumugi, who put squid on the menu, although there's absolutely no squid at all. After Inuzuka was done with his part, he passes on the flavor testing over to Kotori, who makes sure to get the taste just right. By the time they were finished with the soup, Tsumugi was quite hungry, so they decide to ditch that idea for now and eat. After taking a sip from the soup, Tsumugi is really happy, which in turn makes Inuzuka quite happy as he starts blushing up. As they are done with the food and are about to head home, Tsumugi tells him that she can't wait for the next time. Kotori, who was really worried about what Inuzuka would say, was soon relieved as he agreed to come again, as preparing food at the restaurant made Tsumugi really happy. He also mentioned the fact that he will be putting some rules. It's a new day as Kotori wakes up early and finds her mother had left a note alongside a freshly prepared meal. The note said that she was out for a bit as she had gone to a cooking program on TV and that she should watch her. She gets ready to eat and turns on her phone to watch the broadcast to find her mother in a sailor uniform, acting like a high schooler. Back at Inuzuka's place, Tsumugi is getting ready for press school while he's making the breakfast and lunch for her. This time, he has burned up the scrambled eggs quite a bit, but he comes in clutch with a decent miso soup, which his daughter enjoys. After this, she cleans up her utensils and Inuzuka, along with her, heads to school with a huge wad of papers. Back at school, Inuzuka is hanging out with Kotori, who was complaining about her mother's outfit choice from the program from the morning, when she asks him whether he is scared of undercooking food. He explains that he, in fact, was, as Tsumugi has a real hard time when she gets a stomachache. Speaking of Tsumugi, who at her press school was making a hamburger with clay, ends up getting in trouble as she has a little bit of a quarrel with the press school bully. Inuzuka, who was at work, was informed about this and he pulls up to pick her up. As he goes into the daycare, he finds her giving a very girly pop attitude to the boy as she refuses to apologize to him. He ends up having to carry her out of the place, and she only opens up after they finally make it home. After he asks her what had happened, she explains that she had felt really bad after the guy had called her a thief, as she had only taken the clay since her friends had offered it to her. Inuzuka tells her that she was not a thief, but rather it was just a misunderstanding, and that she shouldn't worry about it as they can buy all her friends' clay to make up for it. Regardless of all of this, Tsumugi is still down as they head over to the restaurant for their hamburger day. Inuzuka and Kotori are hoping that by the time they are done with the cooking, Tsumugi will feel better as they set off on the cooking. As always, Inuzuka is tasked with the cutting of the vegetables, and this time they are onions. Now, speaking from experience, onions are the worst vegetable to cut. I literally cry every time, but luckily Inuzuka uses protection unlike me. Of course, I meant protection when cutting onions. Anyways, as they keep on cooking, they can't help but notice that Tsumugi is still gloomy, so Inuzuka asks her what he can do to make her feel better. After listening closely and making up with her, the gang is finally back in high spirits as they get to shaping up the meat patty. After topping up the food with homemade sauce and an egg, it was finally done and everyone damn well enjoyed it. Tsumugi then reveals that she had got the clay so she could make her father a birthday present, and that was a clay hamburger, of course. That's when Inuzuka realizes that it was his birthday as it was just a minute past midnight. Kotori, not knowing what to do, offers him her egg, but he rejects it and says that he was good. She promises to make something better than what they had made as a treat for his birthday. The next day at work, one of the other teachers working with Inuzuka gives him a package full of vegetables, which were said to be from his village. He was apparently distributing them among all his colleagues. After school, once they reach home, another package had arrived, this one being from Inuzuka's mother. They open up the package to find even more vegetables. Tsumugi, who hates veggies as most kids her age, looks through the whole box searching for meat. Inuzuka sees this and decides he will make a meat and veggie mixed dinner, which turns out good in his opinion. But it wasn't as good for Tsumugi, who ends up crying after eating the veggies. At night, and the next day itself, all he could think of was what he was going to do about this situation. He talks with Kotori and tries to come up with a solution for this, but the two of them can't relate, as neither of them were picky eaters. That's when Kotori suggests that they can make something delicious with the veggies that Tsumugi might actually like, and that she would ask her mother about a recipe for it. Inuzuka agrees and plans to meet with her later that day at the restaurant. While at school, she thinks about what she can do, and even asks her friend about what she could do to make food that can get kids to eat lots of veggies. Meanwhile, Inuzuka also tries to get the view of some of the mothers from the press school kids, but all he gets is that different families have different views on it. As night falls, it was time for the cooking to begin, and Kotori reveals that she is making gratin. But what Tsumugi didn't know was that they would be cutting the veggies into tiny bits and hiding them in bechamel sauce to cover the veggies with. They start by washing all the veggies, and as a way to get Tsumugi to stay interested, he asks her to wash the vegetables for her. All is going well until she sees a bell pepper, but Kotori comes in clutch and saves the game by showing that the bell pepper could be used like a cup. Once they were done with getting the vegetables cut into tiny bits, they worked on the bechamel sauce, which had to be done just right so that it wouldn't get clumped up. Inuzuka, using his 200 IQ parenting skills, tells Tsumugi to use a spell to help stop the clumping, which keeps her interest in the whole veggie-based dinner they were going to have. After finally making the sauce, it was time to add it onto the filling, and Tsumugi is excited. Kotori, who had heard from Inuzuka earlier that day that Tsumugi likes cherry tomatoes, comes in clutch and asks her to place the tomatoes on top. After this, they finally bake the food up, and it baked perfectly. The taste was just as great, as even Tsumugi, who loathes vegetables, ends up liking it, well, everything except that bell pepper, which she skillfully manages to feed to her father in the cover of the bechamel sauce. His own idea had come back to bite him, but what mattered was that Tsumugi enjoyed the food, and Inuzuka couldn't have been happier. Kotori and her friend had gone to see a movie, and on their way back, she suddenly had some cravings for donuts. This was on her mind as she got off the station and was walking when she ran into Tsumugi, who was walking with a blonde-haired man. She obviously was worried, so she decided to follow them and stalk the man, to not let anything happen to Tsumugi. As she kept spying, the man, who had just given her an ice cream, was about to hand a cigarette to her, and that was when she blew her cover as she stopped them. Just about then, Inuzuka comes there and thanks the mystery man for keeping her company. Turns out, this was one of his high school friends, and the cigarette was just a chocolate. The two of them catch up while Kotori and Tsumugi play. That's when she gives the idea of making donuts to her. Meanwhile, Yaji, the blonde guy, keeps on messing around with his high school friend. All of a sudden, the two are approached by Kotori, who says that they should make donuts. Inuzuka is a bit confused, and that's when Yaji spills the fact that Tsumugi resists eating donuts, although she likes to try them. So Inuzuka, without a second thought, agrees to make donuts as they head home. The next day, Inuzuka arrives early at Megumi's restaurant, and Kotori had already prepared all the ingredients necessary for the food preparation. They start the process, and it all goes smooth as Tsumugi also gets involved with the cooking and helps out. After they were done with the dough, they would have to wait for a while, so this leaves a chance for Inuzuka and Tsumugi to go to the nearby arcade and have some father and daughter bonding. Once they make it back, the donuts are ready to be fried, and this was the tricky part. The thing about frying donuts was that you had to get the optimal temperature, or you would end up burning the whole batch. That's what they end up doing, but luckily there were 6 more left. This time, after carefully measuring the temperature, Inuzuka makes no mistake as he makes a proper donut. They end up glazing and putting all sorts of stuff on the donuts, and Tsumugi is more than happy. How wholesome, eh? After a few days, Shinobu, who was Kotori's friend from school, wanted to check up on her, so she decided to take some food with her and go over to her place. But when she arrived at the place, she finds that there was nobody, so she ends up going to the restaurant. As she opens the door, she was surprised to see a teacher and a little kid cooking with her. After explaining the situation to her, Shinobu was mad at Kotori for not telling her, but soon changes up the mood and says that she could join them as she was really good with cooking herself. They set up a date, and Tsumugi even goes as far as to mark it on her little calendar. How cute, eh? After hearing the word party, Tsumugi thinks they would be having a legit party, so she starts making invitations to all her friends and even Yaji. Inuzuka puts a stop to this, but he realizes that it has been so long since they had a party over at their place, and they might as well have one for a change. They plan on making gyoza for the party, and he tells this to Kotori at school, and she was 100% good with the idea, as she tells him she will find the recipe from her mom. While on her way back, she informs Shinobu about this as well, and she agrees to get her the best ingredients for the dish. It was the day of the gyoza party, and Shinobu and Yaji both show up at the restaurant. They all start cooking and soon realize how good Shinobu and Yaji were at cooking, as they watch them like it was a cooking program. While preparing the gyoza, Tsumugi is really happy about how her father is working hard on it, and Shinobu notices this. She takes Kotori out of the house for a bit, and they talk about this, and she realizes that this wasn't just about cooking for her, but rather, it was bringing her joy. After that, she even tells Yaji to get the hint and lets Inuzuka have the spotlight for a moment as he makes final preparations for the gyoza. The gyoza is finally cooked, and we find out that there were more types of gyoza which Shinobu and Yaji had brought, so the gyoza party ends up going way better than they had thought. After working tirelessly all these days, Inuzuka was bound to be sick, and sick he was as he lay in bed with a fever, not being able to wake up. Tsumugi doesn't take this well as she gets inspired by some anime to go out and save her father. She gears up as she is about to head out on her adventure. She uses the stools to reach the locks and manages to open up the door. After this, she leaves the house and goes through roads, being helped by people to cross the street, meeting dogs and even sharks on her way. Meanwhile, Inuzuka had finally woken up. He called out for Tsumugi but couldn't find her anywhere, so he realizes she has left the place. Tsumugi, on the other hand, had finally reached her endpoint, and that was Kotori's house. She somehow manages to find it, and Kotori lets her in. She explains that Inuzuka is sick and that she was worried about him. Kotori realizes she has to do something, so she packs up some meds and some food and is about to head over to Inuzuka's place. But before they could make it there, they find an extremely worried Inuzuka looking for Tsumugi in the town. When they meet up, as any father would be, he was mad at Tsumugi for wandering out on her own as he yells at her. He tries to take her home with him, but she throws a tantrum and they end up having to go over to the restaurant. At the restaurant, Kotori is worried about the two of them and wants to make both of them feel better, so she starts cooking some rice. Meanwhile, Inuzuka makes up with Tsumugi and tells her that he was only yelling because he was worried about her and that she shouldn't do that again. Kotori, who was watching this, got carried away and the rice ended up burning. She thinks of what she could do when she realizes she can just make some mochi from the burned rice if they could remove the burned parts. And making mochi they did, as they started lumping up the rice like clay and making it into a corn dog shape, which they would fry. The results were amazing as always, as the mochi came out great. The next day, Inuzuka was up and all energetic as he makes breakfast and wakes up Tsumugi, who was relieved that he was doing better now. The next day, Inuzuka takes a day off from school and Kotori is worried as to whether he was sick or whether there was another issue. It turns out it wasn't anything serious, as he had just gone to Tsumugi's preschool, as it was the parents' day. While over at the preschool, he overhears some of the ladies talking about making new bags every year, and Inuzuka couldn't help but notice that Tsumugi had been using the same bag since forever. He couldn't get this thought off his head, as even by the end of the program, he was pretty bummed about it. At home, after Tsumugi tells about how the bully from her preschool, whose name was Mikio, had told her that he would marry her once they were big. Of course, Tsumugi, being the boss girl she was, rejected him completely. Anyways, Inuzuka then brings up the talk about the bag and how he was going to get her a new one, as she had been using it for far too long. It is then that she reveals she doesn't want a new bag, as this bag was made by her mother, so she wants to treasure it. So instead of a bag, Inuzuka tells her that he would try his best to cook her favorite dish, which her mother had made for her, and she lists out a couple of dishes, including squid. After finally remembering it, he goes off to school the next day and he and Kotori decide to make the dish for her. At the restaurant, things are heating up as they start cooking the squid. While cutting the squid, Inuzuka puts his fingers inside the squid to remove its bowels and is reminded of his late wife. Cough, cough. After managing to finish with the squid, he moves onto the cutting part. And that's when he cuts his finger a bit. Of course, it was no big issue as he patches it up and gets right back to work. After a long session of cooking, he was done with the dish as the sizzling food was served. As always, they loved the food and Inuzuka was more than happy at the fact that he managed to make this dish as he remembers his late wife. After their dinner, they are about to head back when Kotori hands him the leftovers, saying that the stew would be even better in the morning. As they head home, Inuzuka tells Tsumugi that he will sew a patch onto the area of her bag that had a stain on it, if she would like that, and she happily complies. She goes on to show off her newly embroidered bag to her friends at school. The day Tsumugi had been waiting for had arrived, the annual kindergarten sleepover. Inuzuka and the other parents are busy as they are cleaning the school premises. As the sun is about to set, the parents are invited to the classroom to see their kids' cooking skills. We see Tsumugi is cutting a carrot well, which leaves a long smile on Inuzuka's face. Shortly after, we see that the kids and parents are eating rice with the curry they had made as they talk about their days. As nightfall arrives, Tsumugi and her friends start lighting crackers with their parents. As the night goes on, the parents are forced to leave the premises as the kids continue with their sleepover. Inuzuka, looking lonely as always, had arrived home and thereafter gets his chores done. As he sits on the couch to rest, he gets a call from his friend who wanted to check up on him. As the two of them talk, Inuzuka is reminded of the dry curry his wife used to make. Thereafter, he was determined to make the same curry for his daughter, as he calls up Kotori to see if she could replicate the curry for him and his daughter the next day. Tsumugi, on hearing the news, is excited as she jumps around the house out of excitement. It's the next day and Kotori is familiar with the recipe as she reads the ingredients from her cookbook. The three of them get to work as they have been appointed with their different responsibilities. As they get through this curry, we see that the three of them share quite a few heartwarming moments. At last, the curry had been done as Kotori assembles the dish. As the three of them take a bite, they are astounded by how good it is. As we cut to the next scene, we see that Tsumugi and Inuzuka both have the same flashback of her mom who had made a weird face while cutting onions. But coincidence, am I right? As they head back home, they talk about the strange coincidence that happened at the restaurant. As the conversation continues, Tsumugi cries over her mom never coming back. Inuzuka takes immediate action as he comforts her. This scene really depicts the love that Inuzuka has for his daughter. The next day, as a way of making Tsumugi feel better, Inuzuka takes her out for a day at the beach. Now, I am not a fan of the hot climate, and going to the beach on such a sunny day was crazy, but is what it is. After coming back from their little fishing trip, Inuzuka texts Kotori, asking whether she knew how to make fish fillet, as he'd have found some fish, or rather was given fish, by an overly excited family who were out fishing. As they all meet up and try to brainstorm what to do with the fresh fish, Shinobu, Kotori's friend, can't help but point out the obvious by telling Inuzuka to learn how to make a fish fillet through a YouTube video. After a bit of running back and forth, they decide on making something similar to a Hamburg steak, but a fish version of it. After cleaning the fish up, Inuzuka goes on to make some incisions and create a proper fillet. Everyone's quite impressed with how it turned out, and they go on to try some raw fish with soy sauce. These are chef's kisses good, as even Tsumugi, who usually doesn't like raw fish, ends up liking it. After this, Inuzuka tells Tsumugi that he was really happy about how she had grown up to be a big, strong girl, regardless of the fact that she was a really tiny little baby. As the cooking goes on, Inuzuka gets the hang of handling the fish much better, as he speed runs through the cleaning. After cutting them up into small pieces and wash it up and make some patties just as promised, and Tsumugi is more than excited when she smells the food. Yaji arrives late as well, and they put the final touches on the dish. The gang starts their usual wholesome family feast, and everyone can't help but enjoy the really good food. Inuzuka really should be winning the Father of the Year award for all the things he does just to make his daughter happy. I mean, it's not every day you see a father so dedicated. And then there's me with my daddy issues, haha. The next day at press school, the girls were talking about a play at school, and the other girls find it quite weird when Tsumugi wanted to be Galagali-san, who turns out to be a little cute pig. This leads her friends to call her a weirdo, which ends up biting her a bit hard as she keeps on wondering about this. It's festival season at school, and the class newsboy comes up to Kotori's class and tells everyone that their plan to do a creep shop might be a loss, as even the second years were doing one. This left everyone to wonder what they would do, while Kotori knew that this was going to rotate around and come back to her, as everyone in the class knew her mother was the celebrity chef. As expected, she got the look from everyone, and she had no choice but to agree to find a solution. Inuzuka realizes that he's not had a creep in a while, and Tsumugi has never had a creep, so he talks with Kotori, and they both decide to run a testing session at the restaurant to make some creeps. After school, when he makes it home, he is about to tell Tsumugi the good news, but he notices that she was pretty down for some reason. She explains what had happened at school, and then talks to her teacher the next day about it, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. Anyway, the day of the creep party has come, and everyone, including Yaji, is at the restaurant as they prepare to make the creeps. Of course, it proves a bit difficult at the start, as it had been the first time he's even tried making these. After a while, everyone notices that Tsumugi is down quite a bit, so everyone gathers around and tries to figure out what was bothering her. She explains that all Inuzuka does is talk about food, and he doesn't talk about girls at all. Yaji explains to her it was like that because all he cares about is Tsumugi's happiness, and that was what it seemed like for her, but the truth is different. After that, she was all happy, and the cooking continues. After a while, the crepes were finally ready, and everyone really enjoyed them as usual. Kotori is also happy as she can now present this recipe to her friends, since they had earlier asked her to come up with a solution for the crepe stall for the festival coming up. And the day of the play had finally come, and Tsumugi shows up with her Galagala costume, and the girl who was off about it can't help but find it cute. The two of them make up, and they agree to do the best play ever. What's even better is that Kotori's crepe stall is a massive success, as everyone loves the recipe she had made. A wholesome day for real. It's been a few days, and Inuzuka and Tsumugi are on their way out to have some dinner, as he was too bored to make dinner for some reason. Tsumugi suggests they go to the restaurant and make something, but Inuzuka wants to eat out, so they go around looking for some places. They come across an okonomiyaki place, and Tsumugi is more than excited as Inuzuka hypes her up for it. It ends up in a disappointment for her, as they don't live up to the hype, so this leaves her have a temper tantrum, and them having to leave early. The next day at school, Inuzuka tells Kotori about what had happened, and they plan to make okonomiyaki at the restaurant and prepare it the way Tsumugi likes. As usual, they arrive at the place, and this time Inuzuka had been expecting to meet Kotori's mom, but as you might have already figured, she had works, so she couldn't make it. Yaji arrives all dressed up as he had thought Kotori's mom would be there, but obviously that wasn't the case. As the cooking starts, Inuzuka notices that Kotori is feeling a bit off, so he tells her that she shouldn't worry that her mom couldn't make it, and although it may look like she doesn't care, it was not that, but rather she had a lot on her mind. While the two have this talk, Tsumugi makes trouble as she flips up one of the bowls while trying to help Yaji, and this ends in Inuzuka having to scold her. After this, Inuzuka and Tsumugi make up as he explains to her that he doesn't like scolding her, just as much as she doesn't like to be scolded, and that he will try not to scold her as much from now on. This cheers her up, and she apologizes to Yaji, and the cooking continues. This time, though, Tsumugi helps her father with the cooking, and it turns out really nice as the okonomiyaki's patterns come out really nice. Just as they were about to eat, guess who makes her guest appearance? It was Kotori's mom, Megumi. Inuzuka and Megumi introduce themselves to each other, and so does Tsumugi. She quickly changes up, and they were all ready to finally enjoy the food while it's warm. As they have the food, Megumi explains to Tsumugi that the reason why Inuzuka's food tasted so good was that he had made it filled with his love and affection for Tsumugi. After she hears this, she is even more grateful for the food as we come to the end of a wholesome anime.